Hello and welcome to this Astranti Top 10 Pre-Seen Issues for the ACCA Strategic Business Leader September 2023 exam. Now in this video I'm going to go through the 10 biggest issues that came out of the pre-seen. Now what I would say here is this as a caveat is this is not a representation of what is likely to come up in the exam. ACCA has said that the entire syllabus is examinable. These are just the 10 things that really stuck out from the pre-seen where they had the most coverage within the pre-seen. So what I'm going to do is go through each of the top 10 and basically explain the relevance of each topic, where it was covered in the pre-seen, the likely issues that may arise surrounding this, or likely issues the company may have, and some key points that could be raised or key things to prepare for based on it. So without further ado, I will start with number 10, which is financial analysis and decision making. Now that is a key part of the SBL syllabus, and there was a lot that we could analyze, a lot of finances that may need to be analyzed within this case. They gave us a lot of statistics. We had things to do with the profit, to do with the revenues, and also various different KPIs. But also the importance of this is not just analyzing what the figures say, it's using them to make decisions. So what's the key relevance here? Well, it's a key SBL topic to understand where perhaps funding is going to come from, where you're going to make decisions, or how you're going to make decisions based on cash. So for example, if you are going to undertake a large project, are you going to raise additional funding through equity, through debt? It's an opportunity to use this as part of other questions as well. So for example, any kind of new project, new routes, new services is going to be tied to funding as well, because cash will be needed to support large investment projects. And of course, as you might expect, given that it is the airline industry, it's a very cash intensive industry. A lot of cash is needed for projects. A lot of cash is needed for day-to-day running as well. When you think about the fuel price, think if the fuel price was to increase, the day-to-day running of the business will be very expensive. And of course, you need to make sure you have cash available to pay for your short-term requirements, to pay for your general working capital requirements. So likely scenarios that may come up would be a short-term working capital issue, perhaps the fact that the fuel prices or the ground management has increased by a dramatic proportion. It could be there's a long-term funding requirement to fund an acquisition, to fund new planes, if we have to replace the planes, or we have to purchase new slots at certain airports and they're quite expensive, and other new projects as well. So lots of reasons why you might need to discuss funding and the importance of funding. And some key points to bring up were from the pre-seen, the need for growth because of that very, very high intense competition, LKK, Brygger, etc. It's a mature market. We do have a reasonable return on our investment, so that's something we can justify to any kind of lenders, to shareholders, etc. It's a key point to bring up. And we are profitable at the moment, so we will have profits that we can potentially argue or communicate to our shareholders. We want to use this profit to reinvest in the organization or to set money aside for that working capital requirements. It's also useful to speak about the kind of long term versus the short term, that actually an investment is just that. It's an investment. It's not necessarily going to yield a short-term return. It could be that actually we lose more money as a result of it in the short term, but there's the long-term sustainability benefit, the long-term benefit of it. It will provide returns over a long enough period of time. It could also lead you into a buy versus lease. We know from the pre-seen that they currently have 75% of their planes owned and they lease the remaining 25%. Now, we could do some sort of investigation because we don't know at the moment. We weren't given specific information about whether or not it is ultimately cheaper to buy or lease. And that will be an argument when we're talking about decision making, as in if we're going to enter a new market, if we're going to purchase new planes, if we're going to perhaps experiment with international trade and we need a big four-engined aircraft, rather than tie ourselves in by purchasing it, we might lease it in the shorter term while we see if there is a valid market there for us to explore. So you can see how all these sort of financial factors tie into that decision-making process, whether it is what kinds of decisions we're going to need to make with regards to investing, with regards to trying out new services, new routes, and also with the short term as well. Think about the capital requirements, our need to pay off our costs in the short term, our need to pay our salaries in the short term. So financial analysis and decision making is a big issue that came out from the pre-scene. There's a lot of relevance to the pre-scene throughout. Now the next one is a supplier issue. There wasn't too much talk about supplier issues within the pre-scene, but why it is relevant is because there was specific focus on suppliers in the pre-scene. And so then any issue with those is going to have a knock-on effect. We rely on third parties. We rely on our partners, the airports, the aircraft manufacturers. We rely on those relationships being maintained to ensure that we have an efficient operation. An efficient operation is critical to our competitive success. Everything is about being as efficient as possible to ensure that we can pass the cost savings on to the passengers so that we can maintain our cost leadership position. So any kind of supplier issue that compromises the quality, the safety, the efficiency is going to compromise our revenues, it's going to compromise our competitive success. So what kinds of things could come up regarding that, or what kinds of scenarios would be impacted by a supplier issue? Well, perhaps we need to source a new supplier because of an issue with an existing supplier due to changes in the quality, changes in the price. A supplier closing, for example, if a certain aircraft manufacturer is closing and we have to then purchase planes from a new aircraft manufacturer, are they going to meet our relevant specs? Are they going to be at the right price point? And would we have to negotiate better rates for that? Are we going to have to leverage our relationship to get better rates, or are we going to have to build a relationship from scratch? So all these things you can imagine would be key issues within the airline industry. So some key points to bring up is that it is a key risk to our operations, and that supplier power is very high. Those of you who watched the previous video, the strategic analysis, we spoke about the key partners, the lack of our ability to switch, the powers of them as well, with the airports in particular. If we need to fly to a particular airport, that's the only airport there, is it easy enough for us to switch to a different airport? Well, maybe we could, but that airport may charge a higher price. That airport may not have any free slots. That airport may be 50 miles away from the destination, whereas the one we're currently at is only 10 miles away from the destination. So that will have an impact on the convenience for our passengers and also the affordability. Not necessarily directly, but maybe indirectly, because yes, they can fly to this airport with us more cheaply than with a full service carrier, but that airport would then require them to do a big expensive transfer to the city rather than the one that's near the city, which has a train line to it directly. So that means that the actual cost of their holiday may come up, and that will then also factor into their choice when choosing an airline. And supplier management, supplier relationships, really, really key to the continued success of this organization. So you sometimes, and there's a phrase that says that a negotiation is not over until both parties are dissatisfied. And so that's essentially what we have to make sure there is, that we have to be willing to potentially give in relationships to maintain those relationships as well. It would also be useful to understand what existing contracts are in place, what kinds of new terms that we could agree, and get those locked in a contract if it's going to be beneficial for us in the long term. There's also an argument to say maybe you would avoid having longer term contracts, particularly when there is a risk involved, and maybe having shorter term contracts in that instance, just so you can test the waters, particularly if you're undertaking any kind of new route. Let's say we expanded to international travel and we were trying it, or even within the regional travel that we currently do, we're trying out a new airport. Let's not buy an airport slot for X amount of years. Let's just buy it for 6 months or buy it for a year so that we can then see if it's worth doing. Now, often with airport slots, they are purchased outright, but they can be sold on as well. So that would mitigate the risk. Now on to issue 8. And this is acquisitions. Now, acquisitions wasn't super relevant in the pre-scene in terms of the way in which it was expressly mentioned within the pre-scene, but this is all part of decision making, and you're expected to be able to do this for your SBL. Now, of course, the industry itself, airline industry in the real world, that does expand often through acquisitions, through purchasing of smaller companies, integrating them, and it's one way in which we could potentially get more of a competitive advantage because of the fact that it's a mature industry. We have big, powerful competitors, and it's very difficult for us to just grow naturally. So acquisitions might be a great way for us to enter new markets. It might be a great way for us to expand our market share. And it links to the financial decision making, the financial analysis as well. So scenarios could be about the benefits or drawbacks of being acquired or acquiring, and it could also be about working with an organization. And what I mean by that is that as an alternative, is rather than acquiring, let's see if we can work with them, then that reduces the problems of integration, that achieves the need for growth and diversify our service offerings, but also splits some of the risk. And some key points to bring up there as well, or key things to prepare, would be the benefits of it, the synergies that's created for the organization, and whether it would be a horizontal, so that's a competitor, vertical integration, so elsewhere in the supply chain, or completely random, well, not random, but a completely different industry altogether. I mentioned that it is an opportunity for the company, but do mention about the risks involved, with the due diligence, the problems of integrating, cultural differences, but it also ties in with the methods of growth, and you can also then tie that in with alternative methods of growth and business valuation as well, which again links back to your financial analysis and decision making. On to issue 7 now. And issue 7 from the pre-scene, big data and cyber security. And again, this was mentioned throughout the pre-scene, and it's also a very important SBL topic, and it's also something that is crucial to the industry in the real world and also to Corjetz within the pre-scene as well. The communication between all the systems vital. You need to make sure that when someone's got their boarding pass on their app, on their phone, that's on your systems. You can't have a passenger being at the gate and being, well, it's not scanning right, we haven't got it in our system, because that's going to have a huge impact on reputation. It's going to have a huge impact on all sorts of problems with your efficiency and your processes. So IT systems, efficient IT systems, communicating, analyzing data, absolutely crucial to maintaining your efficiency. And communication, data communication was referenced in the pre-scene. So again, likely scenarios, issues to do with handling and processing data, how you are going to respond to a systems breach. There have been real world examples of British Airways, for example, who've had their data hacked, cybersecurity issues. What kinds of processes can you have in place? What kinds of big data systems can you use to manage and automate data collection and curation effectively, etc.? And again, going back to this idea of new investment, improving the user analysis, helping to identify what the user wants, helping to identify the passenger's needs, and therefore being able to improve your processes, improve your efficiency, and pass those cost savings on to the passenger. Again, key points to raise: the necessity, the growth of big data, it being an opportunity of data collection and big data management, important to the company, opportunity for the company, important to the real world industry as well. Technology is absolutely crucial and critical. And of course, it's one of our values as a company, one of Corjetz's values, to be innovative. And now, new markets and routes at issue 6. And of course, it's a good opportunity for the company to expand. It said in the pre-scene that it had the data about the passenger numbers, about the revenue generated, the number of routes, etc. And it did identify that actually 80% of the global market is outside Hungary. Now, given that Hungary is a mature market, there may be other markets that are less mature. Also, there's just a huge market out there. That 80% of the market is actually outside of Hungary, and it could be that if we get a piece of that market, it's going to be very useful for us as a company. Again, this can link this with funding, link this with risk, link this on impact to the environment, and also you can talk about the general business environment as well within it. So some likely scenarios could be new routes within Hungary, but it could also be a multi-regional expansion. Use your knowledge, thinking of your Porter's diamond, to expand into other continents and to replicate that regional model with huge growth opportunities, or maybe even international expansion. But of course, that would involve potentially working with different airports, maybe having to utilize a hub and spoke more. And of course, we use a point-to-point. Could also require the purchase of new planes because of the size of the planes needed for international travel, or what they determine to be international travel within the context of this pre-scene. Of course, flying from a country to a country within Hungary is international, but they're talking more about continent-to-continent travel, transatlantic, trans-Pacific type, if you're thinking about the real world. And also, these may be different customers as well. You're not just appealing to the same sorts of customers there. The ones that are happy to fly within Hungary, you might be looking at different sorts of tourists, different sorts of business travel. And then you might need to tie that in with having more business class, more first class as well, because of course people may not want to sit on a very cramped plane in an economy seat if they're flying 18 hours. So some key points. It's a key growth opportunity, but remember that locations may have different needs, different types of tourists, different types of business clients, different types of ways in which the business is done, the way the airport systems, the time slots and the air traffic control works, etc. There might be different cultural issues as well, such as legal issues, different political economic factors in different countries, and also new competitors. You're exposing yourself to new competitors. It could be that there are established competitors in that market that you are now competing directly with. And of course, general things like cultural and language difference is always a factor when it comes to expanding into different countries, into different markets. So on to the next 5 issues now, starting with health and safety. And again, that probably won't be a huge surprise to many of you watching the video. It was mentioned throughout the pre-scene. It was mentioned as one of the values of the organization. It's been mentioned in the real world, in the media, in the airline industry. There's been lots of talk of strikes at airports, and staff that work on airplanes have been upset with the pay that they're given, or the treatment that they've got, the training that they've got, etc. So it's a very important topic, and it also ties with a lot of key parts of the SBL syllabus as well. It ties with the risk management, it ties with stakeholder management, it ties with general staffing issues, which of course are important topics. But also, in the pre-scene itself, it also talks about passengers, it talks about safety of passengers, security of passengers, and that extends not just obviously in terms of data, but it turns into their physical well-being as well. You've got an airplane, airplane's very dangerous potentially, there's a lot of things that can go wrong, it's very high up, people could fall off when they're climbing up the steps, there's obviously the jet engines, and they're very dangerous. The plane itself, there's the risk of obviously of it landing abruptly, or if it's a poor landing that someone might be injured, etc. So there's lots of safety concerns here. And a lot of that ties in with reputational risk as well. If you have a risk of, or if there's an issue with someone is injured on one of your aircraft, then that's going to have a very negative impact on you. I saw recently, and no, this is not necessarily admissible as evidence, so to speak, but I saw recently there was a thing on Instagram, an Instagram reel, and it was laughing and joking about, a decent Ryanair landing, and it was the plane landed with such a force that it bounced back up, and everyone was flying, almost jumped out of their seats, etc. And it's things like that that are going to have a negative impact on your reputation, particularly if someone actually gets injured in that instance. You have a lot of the vertical G-forces in that sense, and that can actually cause back injuries and things like that. So likely scenarios that may arise, or likely things in which you might need to talk about health and safety, could be that someone is injured. Perhaps you need to talk about how you're going to respond, how you're going to mitigate that, how you're going to communicate that to your stakeholders, how you're going to communicate that to the public. It could also be that new legislation is brought in with regards to airport security, airplane security, and how you're going to implement that effectively. And also tying to costs as well, how you mitigate risks, how you perhaps do insurance costs, etc., and investment in health and safety. So what I would always suggest is that health and safety is not something that you should be trying to avoid. You should be investing in health and safety. We know that it's very important. We know that the values of Corjetz specifically said about the security and the safety of their passengers, security and safety of their staff. So investing in health and safety is a very positive thing to do in this instance. As some key points to raise, of course, the risk of insurance and the risk of health and safety costs, liability costs, etc. when someone is injured. It's part of the vision and the values and the mission of the organization. Staff training is also crucial for the organization. They've already said that it's something they value, something they want to invest in their staff. So ensuring that health and safety training is included in that is vital. And generally having a good safety record is part of your competitive advantage. Or it's not even a competitive advantage even. It's the minimum required to compete in the marketplace. If you are an airplane or an airline company that has a poor health and safety record, then that's it for you as a business, really, because the regulatory bodies are going to come down on you, the passengers aren't going to trust you, everyone else will have a reasonable health and safety record. So the minimum required, just a real, what they would call a threshold competence to even compete, even begin to compete in the marketplace, is to have a good health and safety record. And it's also part of your stakeholder relations as well. Communicating that, ensuring you're showing and demonstrating to your various different stakeholders that you take these sorts of things seriously is very, very important. Now on to issue number 4, and that's competitors and your competitor force, the power of competitors, monitoring competitor activity. So, for example, we're already told in the pre-scene that there is 2 big main competitors. So what you might say here is that any activity conducted by these 2 competitors is going to have an impact on our business, particularly our Hundria business. If Brigare were to purchase some smaller competitors and grow their market share, be able to take advantage of economies of scale and push their prices down even further, the impact that could have. Particularly because it is that very mature market. It's highly competitive. It's very difficult to just find additional revenue, to find additional customers. Because it's a mature market, it's difficult to find that competitive advantage, and you often have to take from other competitors in order to succeed. And because, of course, the low-cost airlines are by default offering a bit of a cost leadership strategy or undertaking a cost leadership strategy, there is a race to the bottom risk, essentially where you're trying to constantly undercut your competitors to the point where no one is making any money anymore, no one is making any profit because you're forced to sell your seats on your plane for such a cheap price. So things that may happen could be that a competitor invests in new tech, new disruptive tech, new automation that completely revolutionizes the booking process and the onboarding process, all these things. And as a result, they can make massive cost savings and they can pass those on and suddenly undercut you by a significant margin. It could be competitors merging or acquiring one another to increase their market share. Or it could be that you have to do that. We've already spoken about acquisitions and the process that you might undertake for buying out a competitor. It could also be that a new entrant comes into the market and changes something, revolutionizes the industry. You might think, well, the threat of new entrants in this industry is quite low. Yes, but remember the history of Corjetz itself. Corjetz itself started with just 2 brothers and 2 second-hand aircraft. But they disrupted the industry. They created a new market trend. The low-cost airlines didn't really exist until they started. Or particularly within Courland. So what would the new thing be? I'm not saying I know what the new thing would be, but there is the risk that for a new entrant, they could potentially get a big foothold in the market if they tap into a new trend, if they introduce something that disrupts the industry. And so key points to bring would be about the organization itself needing to be at the forefront of innovation, needing to be the one driving changes within the industry. That's part of the culture, it's part of the values of the organization. And there are very high rivalry forces, if you think about your 5 forces in here, so it is a very competitive market, and there is a real risk that you might lose part of your market position if your competitors were to expand. Although to be aware that if, of course, the there are anti-competitive laws in place, monopoly laws in place, that there may be certain limits to how big companies can get, because that, of course, ensures that there'll still be some competition. And also think about the impact of changes to the market, impacts of competitors' actions, and impact of disruptive technology. Next up, we have new service. So again, this is quite a broad one, could revolve around many key issues arising in the pre-scene. And it's a very useful sort of issue to discuss because you can use financial information to analyze it. Also links with risk and funding as well. These are all, of course, important topics in the SBL syllabus. There are lots of possible new projects, new services, new products, new routes, whatever it may be that you can talk about for Corjetz. So, for example, new services such as business class, cargo, international flights as well, all the different things that they talk about there. Also, we're talking about overseas, whether that's international or multi-regional. Then there's, of course, issues with cultural, legal issues. Pestel would be really useful. The Pestel we've been building over the course of this video series, and acquisitions and new IT implementations as well. Important things to remember as well is change management. That's another key part of the SBL syllabus. And change management is, of course, all about how you integrate and implement change effectively, making sure you have someone that's responsible for it. Make sure you get the buy-in, because that is what happens. People do not like change, and therefore you need to have an effective change management system process to monitor, to measure that change, to make changes if the change is not happening effectively enough. So that's another important point. And so some key points to talk about: new services, new products, etc. And think of this as a bit of a checklist as well. Is, first of all, you have to establish it's financially viable. The shareholders need to know if it's going to make money. Is it going to be consistent with the values of your company, the mission of your company? Is it going to go against what's making your company successful? These, again, are things to consider, because, of course, if it's not financially viable, then perhaps it's not feasible. If it is not acceptable to shareholders, if it's not consistent with what your company is about, if it's not consistent with Corjet's values, their mission, what we do, then maybe it's not suitable. Also think about how it's going to be funded and make a recommendation, justify that, and talk about how to take it forward. If you really want to show and demonstrate yourself as a senior leader, as a strategic business leader, then really think about how you're going to drive projects forward and handle them, and handle the change if it implements any change, etc., going forward. Number two, should not come as a surprise to anyone: environmental impacts and environmental reporting, integrated reporting, etc. All of these things are so important for this industry. You don't need me to tell you that impact on the environment, the impacts on rules and regulations and government targets for carbon emissions is a big thing for the airports and the airline industry. Particularly as the pre-scene specifically said that there was already issues with the consciousness of the public, the consciousness of the passengers. Everyone's aware that it contributes actual whole percentages to the global emissions. So changes in government regulations, for example, in the UK, they've got targets of net zero by 2050, etc. All of these things could come in. So Corland or Hundria, the Hundria block, for example, trading block, could bring in regulations. Now, from a commercial sense, there's also an opportunity there, because if you are the best airline for impact on the environment, if you have CSR projects, environmental projects that offset your carbon emissions, it's really good for branding, particularly given that customers, passengers, the public, more and more are demanding socially responsible services, things for the environment. It's particularly prevalent at the moment where you have all these issues that are going on in the real world, the wildfires that have been happening in Europe, for example, the extreme heat waves. All of these have been linked to global warming. And therefore, as an industry which has a big impact on global warming and a big impact on the environment, there's quite a close tie-in. And so you want to be positioning yourself as the airline that's taking steps to mitigate that. So, for example, this could be to do with a new project for social responsibility, for the environment, for carbon offsetting, charitable maybe as well, just to show that you are socially responsible, show that you're caring about the environment. Maybe you're planting X number of trees. Perhaps you're publishing the fact that you are reducing your fuel usage. Perhaps publishing the fact that you're reducing the weight of your aircraft so it uses less fuel, etc. Could also introduce CSR reporting and integrative reporting. You might have heard of it, or that's how you may know it from your SBL syllabus. So things like data collection from yourself, from your partners as well, what you are doing to improve your impact on the environment, what you are doing to prove you are a socially responsible citizen. Or potentially even it could be an issue about a one-off thing that compromises your own ethics, compromises your values, your CSR, perhaps to get low prices. And then, of course, what maybe you should be arguing then is that we shouldn't be doing that because it's not ethically the right thing to do. And that's the key phrase that I have used as well. In ethics is the right thing to do. You think about your IFAC and you think about the various different ethics that you as an accountant, as a trainee accountant, are responsible, and how you should live by, the code of conduct that you need to act by. Ethics is super, super important and should be something that you are promoting. So ethically, being a good corporate citizen, being good for the environment, taking steps to improve your impact on the environment are all things to do. And in addition to that, there's lots of opportunity to improve your branding, and also it's just part of your vision as well. Sustainability, things like that, they came up as key values for Corjetz. And then finally, a staffing issue. The reason why this is there, and again, no surprise, is that it's very, very common, and that leadership, people, stakeholder management, they are super critical SBL topics. A huge part of the syllabus is relevant to that, or is registered to that, and asks questions, and it shows that you have to prove knowledge and prove that you can apply information regarding leadership, regarding people, stakeholder management, good, strong leadership, good stakeholder management, good communication, particularly given the importance of the management and the staff to this organization. We've already spoken repeatedly about the importance of well-trained staff, efficient staff, ones that can operate effectively, because anything that is not efficient is going to increase your costs. Increasing your costs means you are not going to be able to make as much profit with your low-cost airline, or you're going to have to then pass on that price increase to the customers. And of course, that goes against what we are about and what our business model is, what our competitive advantage is. And I even mentioned in that section in the pre-scene about risks as well, the importance of staff, the importance of retaining staff, the importance of making sure they're safe, they're secure, they are satisfied in their jobs. So things that may happen could be issues with staffing, such as them wanting to have pay rises or threatening to leave, there being changes in your working conditions you've got to implement to cut costs and the impact that's having. There are also contemporary issues in the media as well. There's been issues with airline staff striking and the delays that it can cause and the negative impact that it can bring upon the airlines. Now, the media sometimes tries to suggest that it's actually the staff's fault for doing this and turn people against the staff for doing it, when actually, if you're just asking for a cost of living increase because your job has expanded and yet pay has gone down in relation to inflation, then actually is it really unreasonable to ask that? And of course, if we were to grow as an organization as well, if we were to expand, if we were to go down any of those new services, such as the business line, such as the multi-regional approach, the international approach, etc., or just general growth within the existing market as we continue to invest in our organization, then more growth means more people. And of course, more people means issues potentially with quality. How do you ensure you're hiring the right people? How do you ensure you're trained effectively enough? And of course, training and retention of staff, all these sorts of things were key values for the company. Could also be a key staff member leaving, such as a member of the board, the CEO, the CFO, etc. And those of you who watched the pre-scene videos, I spoke about the issues that have arisen in the past where you do not have the nomination committee creating a succession plan, ensuring that you've got the right people to step in when they leave, because it can cause the share price to drop because of the lack of market confidence. So that's a reason to ensure that you've got steps in place to keep key management, so people on the board, and also that you've got a succession plan in order to find a replacement. That mitigates the difficulty and the cost of finding that replacement. And of course, staff, really, really important. You don't want to just cave into demands all the time because that sets a negative precedence, of course, but you have to appreciate how important staff are to this organization. And I've specifically said importance of the staff to the strategy here. Because, of course, naturally, you can't fly a plane without your cabin crew, so that's a big operational risk. It's part of our values as well to have effective, well-trained staff, satisfied staff, staff that are safe, staff that are secure, etc. But also because of this idea of the low-cost airline. You need efficient, well-trained staff to operate that model. If you're wasting lots of time and money training staff and paying for the mistakes of inefficient, untrained staff, new staff, then that's going to negatively impact your business model. So, of course, that's why it's so crucial to the strategy of Corjetz. So that brings us to the end of this video, our top 10 pre-seen issues. Again, just that disclaimer that this is not to suggest that these are going to be the issues that are going to come up in your exam. As I mentioned before, ACCA have said that any topic in the SBL syllabus could come up, and no one topic is more likely than the others. This video is just explaining some of the key issues that were in the pre-scene, the topics that were referenced and relevant to the pre-scene perhaps more than others. And of course, they naturally feed into lots of different other subtopics as well. So I hope you have enjoyed this video. I hope you have found it useful. And that's the final video in our video series now. So thank you for watching, and I wish you the best of luck in your exam. So thank you very much for watching this video. I hope you have enjoyed it, and more importantly, I hope you have found it useful. If you did enjoy this video and you want to see more of it, or if you are studying for the September 2023 exam for the ACCA Strategic Business Leader, then please do visit our website www.astranti.com. We have a free ACCA SBL pre-scene pack that includes all 3 videos for the pre-scene analysis, the strategic analysis, and the top 10 pre-scene issues. In addition to that, we also have our industry analysis documents going through the airline industry and 2 ACCA SBL mock exams with complete solutions for you to practice ahead of the exam. And also, you have access to our SBL discussion board, so you and fellow students like yourself in the same position studying for this exam will be able to chat, will be able to ask questions and receive answers from our tutors. And the best part is all of this is completely free. In order to access this, please click the link in the description or visit the website www.astranti.com and sign up for our free ACCA SBL resources now. So thank you again for watching this video, and do check out that website for more free content.